was in college, I used to house sit for a family for a few years when they would go on their annual family vacations. I've had a handful of other scary, creepy experiences, but the one I want to talk about today was the one that forced me to quit house sitting for them. I was in my 19s and was trying to make ends meet. House sitting was one of the many side hustles I had. The family would be going on a 2-week vacation abroad and wouldn't have any service. So if anything went wrong, I would have to call the police or their relatives depending on the situation. Please keep in mind that I've already had a few creepy experiences with their house prior to this, but it was never scary enough to deter me because they paid me very well. I used to work at an animal shelter, so I was well versed in animal care and I knew about cat behavior. This family had 4 cats who were all very well behaved. For the first few days, all was well. I slept in the guest bedroom and went to school from their house because they lived close enough to where I could just walk to class and didn't have to pay for parking or bring lunch since I could just go back to their place. Then the issues began after a few days. My boyfriend at the time came over with dinner to keep me company, as he knew I was always a bit creeped out by the house. We sat in the guest bedroom and watched TV for a few hours, eating until he said he needed to go home. Sometimes he'd sleep over, but he told me on this particular night that he had a strong gut feeling he needed to sleep at home. He urged me to go home because that gut feeling he had was really bad. At that point, it was around midnight, and to be honest, I didn't want to go home. To put it bluntly, I have a complicated home life and didn't get along with my parents. The only time I'd get a break from home was the annual house sitting once a year, and I didn't feel like wasting it. My only sibling, who's also my best friend, moved out due to the toxicity. And honestly, home wasn't home without them anymore. I told him that I'll be fine and I'll lock up after he left. He was still really uneasy and tried to persuade me to go home once again. He tried to explain that while he had slept over before, for some reason tonight the house just felt unsettling. I thought it was because the house was over a century old, but it was just renovated, so I felt better about it. I reminded him that there was a home security alarm that I always set, the neighborhood was safe, and I had 4 friendly cats with me. He reluctantly left and drove home, and that was when it started happening. I shut all the doors and windows, locked everything, and set the security alarm. Once I got comfortable in bed, the TV started to turn on by itself. We were just using the TV, so I thought I'd accidentally sat on the remote, but I saw the remote on the nightstand. I quickly turned it off. Just as it went off, it turned back on. I thought it was strange, since the TV was working perfectly the entire night, but it was even stranger that when the TV turned on by itself, it went to this off channel, like it was just black and white, like it had no signal. So I kept turning it off and it kept turning on. I began to freak out and unplugged the TV entirely. Even though I'd had creepy experiences before in this house, this one had never happened before. I told myself that the house was just renovated. Maybe there were some wiring issues. I still didn't go home and went and slept on the couch instead. The next day, my boyfriend came over again. I told him about what happened the night before, and he told me that I should have just went home. I was pretty freaked out, but honestly, it was still not as bad as having to deal with my family. That night, we had dinner together again and watched a movie in the living room. For this next part, I do have to explain the house structure. The house has 2 floors. There's a first floor where you come in through the front door, straight into the living room, and the second floor is actually the basement, which is essentially a big living room with another room that can be used as a spare bedroom. The stairs leading downstairs are incredibly creaky and creepy. I don't understand why they didn't fix it during the renovation. As for the cats, they love to be everywhere and anywhere. They all had the personality where they wanted to be around you, but not necessarily held or cuddled. They were all pretty calm cats that liked quieter environments. Of the 4 cats, there was one cat that was the youngest, at around 3 years old, and he was just a bit smaller than the other 3. That night, as we watched the movies, my blood ran cold as I heard sounds from the basement that sounded like an infant crying. It didn't happen often, but it sounded like an infant crying. My boyfriend froze as he slowly turned to look at me, as if signaling to me silently if I heard it too. I remembered from my time working in the animal shelter during my training that sometimes cats sound like babies, especially if they're in duress. As I mentioned earlier, the cats like to be around people and will follow you around the house, but not close enough to cuddle. I counted, and only counted 3. The little younger cat was missing. I figured it must be the younger cat and went downstairs to the basement, where I found it stuck in the spare room. He was smaller but more energetic than the other cats. He somehow closed the door behind him and was stuck in the room all alone. I carried him up the stairs and we resumed the movie. Mid-movie, we did pause it as it was time to feed the cats. The owners had a strict food schedule for their cats. The cat's food station was in the kitchen, and the kitchen was the only area that connected to the basement. To best explain the layout of the house, the main entrance connects to the living room. The living room then diverges into 2 different sections. One connects to the kitchen, and the other connects to 3 bedrooms, one being the spare bedroom, a master bedroom, and another bedroom that belongs to the family's child, with the living room being connected to the kitchen as well. The kitchen was the connecting area, where you must enter it to go to the basement or living room. For these cats, the only time that they didn't want to be around humans was while they were eating and after they ate, as they like to take naps or rest with their full bellies. They like to nap in the master bedroom or the teenager's room, as it smelled like their family. They always did this every year that I babysat them, so it wasn't new. It also wasn't unusual to not see them for a little bit after mealtime. We finished our movie and went into the kitchen, void of any cats. As we were enjoying dinner, we both once again heard crying noises from the basement. It was naturally louder because we were in the kitchen, which was closer to the basement. I didn't see any cats in the kitchen, and I didn't think to check the living room because I was panicking internally. My boyfriend was visibly creeped out, and I told him I'd check it out since it was likely the cat again. I couldn't help but notice that the cry sounded a little different from earlier. It was more frequent and higher pitched. I turned on the lights to the basement and slowly crept down the stairs, saying the cat's name. With each step, the crying got louder, but when I finally made it down, the crying abruptly stopped. I checked the spare room, any crevices, and under the couch. He was nowhere. At that point, I was feeling so scared I could hear my heartbeat in my head. I don't even go on regular walks, I definitely don't jog, and I absolutely don't run, but I ran up those stairs like my life depended on it. When I got back into the kitchen, I felt my whole body go cold as my heart sank. My boyfriend was standing in the kitchen with a horrid look on his face as all 4 cats surrounded him. He told me that as I went down the stairs to the crying noises, the 4 cats came out at the same time from the area where the bedrooms were. No cat had been downstairs the entire time. I immediately and silently packed up my items, jammed it into my backpack, and we both left the house. For the remaining week, I would only return to the house once a day to clean the litter box and feed them. I know I was going against their eating schedule, but at that point, I really didn't care. After the last day, I locked up, dropped the keys into their hiding spot, thanked them for the opportunity, but that it was my last time and I never returned. I hated that house, and looking back, the experiences I had each year seemed like it was escalating. I should have stopped much sooner. I still remember calling my sibling during the drive to my parents' house after the incident. I felt even worse when they revealed that they also had their own experience in that house and kept it away from me because they knew I was trying to save money to move out, and they didn't want to scare me. First, I'll start off with descriptions of all of those involved. My name is Kelsey. I was 17 years old at the time of this event. I'm 5'8". My friend Haley's 5'8". My friend Sammy is 5'7". It was March 19th, 2016. I was dog sitting at my mom's friend's house for some extra cash to help me out before going off to college next year. It was a cool spring night, and the people I was dog sitting for have a super cool sunroom where my friends and I like to smoke. So I decided to invite 2 of my other friends over to spend the night and make this whole dog sitting thing more fun. Haley and Sammy were a little older, with Haley being 23 and Sammy being 22. They brought over some vodka for us to drink. We hung out for a couple hours, drinking, smoking, laughing, and catching up. Then we start to get a bunch of phone calls. Now normally, this would not be weird, except for the fact that the phone was supposed to be disconnected. We ignore the first couple phone calls, thinking they'll leave a message or a call back in the morning, as it was nearly midnight. The calls were persistent, and we could tell this person was not going to leave us alone until we answered. Sammy decided to answer the phone, and there was a man on the line, claiming to have the owner's wallet at a gas station 25 minutes from the house, which did not make sense. This man insisted that we come pick up the wallet now, which we all found extremely odd. After minutes of this man insisting that it was urgent that we come pick up the wallet, Sammy finally got the man to understand that we were not leaving the house and that we'll get it in the morning. We hung up the phone and all got a weird feeling in our stomachs. We grabbed the dog, Willis, and run into the back bedroom, shut all the blinds and locked the door. We already have impaired judgment because of the weed and booze. We talk things out, and we decide we were just being paranoid, and the man was just trying to make sure we get the wallet back to the owner safely. Hours go by of us drinking and smoking some more. Then we decide to watch a funny movie and make some food to calm down and get ready for bed that night. We move from the sunroom to the living room and pop in a DVD. The sunroom is located in between the kitchen and living room of the house and the backyard by the pool. The door in between the pool and the sunroom does not have a lock on it, but the door that's in between the kitchen and living room and the sunroom does not have a dog door for Willis to go out back to go to the bathroom. So we all agree that although we were a little spooked by the phone call, we were in a safe neighborhood and Willis would bark if anything were to come to the door. Time creeps by. We were laughing on the couches, Haley and I sitting next to each other on one, and Sammy across the room on the other. The clock struck 3 a.m., and that's when things started to get creepy. Remember earlier how we left the lockable door open to the sunroom so that Willis could get outside to pee? That's where he entered from. I'm fully immersed in the comedy, but do you ever get that unexplainable feeling that you're being watched by somebody? That feeling suddenly became overpowering. I turn towards the kitchen and see a dark mass hunched over in the kitchen. I freeze, and for a second, think I'm seeing things. I watch as this mass reaches up into the cabinet, and that's when I realize there's someone in the house. I nudge Haley's side with my elbow and say real quietly, "Haley, I think there's somebody in the house." She looks into the kitchen and screams bloody murder. This dark mass then whips his head around and looks directly at me. We make eye contact, and I felt my entire body tense up. All I could see were his piercing blue eyes contrasting against the orange lamp just below the cabinet on the table. Everything else was covered by his black hoodie, pants, shoes, and gloves. He even wore a ski mask that covered up to his nose and mouth. Sammy then gets up to look at what Haley and I are staring at and somehow musters up the courage to yell. He calmly closes the cabinet and slowly walks out the sunroom doors. We immediately get up and rush to the corner of the room farthest from where he was crouching and call 911. 9 last night. They arrive 3 minutes later and search the entire apartment, take our statements, and sit outside the house for the rest of the night to see if the intruder would come back. The three of us did not stick around long enough to see if he would. We leave our booze, weed, and my car all at the house with the cops and the dog and head home. We come back the next day to find clothes all throughout the house, messed with and crumbs by the doggy door. Understandably so, Willis wouldn't bark at whoever came in. To this day, we still have no idea who called us and/or who came into that house. I have not been back since. I'm 28 years old. I've been an animal lover ever since I was a child, which led to me pursuing a career path that had to do with animals. I'm a veterinary assistant, but for a while I also had a little side gig in which I'd offer to house sit animals for people going away on vacation and such. This ranged from cats to dogs to birds. I had actually house sat entire weekends a few times for people who presumably didn't have any family available to watch them. Being a young female who also already works at a veterinary hospital, most people weren't intimidated by the idea of me staying in their house while they're gone. I wasn't just some random person off the street. My credentials were all over the internet. I got a response to my ad one day from a man named Jeremy seeking my services. He had a 20-something-year-old macaw and a cat that he needed to have watched for a weekend while he went away. He brought up a price right away and offered me $300 for the entire weekend. I accepted that offer because that was a fair deal. I have experience dealing with birds of all types, including macaws, but this would be my first time I'd ever watch one for an entire weekend. I met Jeremy at his house. It was a basic, normal corner house for the neighborhood. He was a short man in his late 50s, if I had to guess. He had graying hair and a graying mustache. He seemed very friendly. In my experience, most animal lovers are. After meeting Jeremy, I met his bird Ringo and his cat Casper. Ringo was huge. I have handled macaws in the past, which I assumed was part of the reason Jeremy hired me. He told me about Ringo's personality and quirks, and how to get him to quiet down if he makes noises. Ringo kept saying, "Daddy's home," as Jeremy would handle him. He laughed and said that's what he says when he sees him. Ringo said a few other phrases along with that, all of them 2 or 3 word phrases. After showing me how to clean the cage and everything like that, he showed me the rest of the house and told me how often to feed Casper. He asked that I don't go into any other bedrooms upstairs besides the guest bedroom where I'd be sleeping, which was understandable. There was a bathroom upstairs right next to the bedroom, and he told me I could help myself to his food. However, I'm a vegan, so I brought my own food for the weekend. After all of this and him getting to know me a bit, he gave me the key to the house and left. I watched through the window as he drove off, and I was left alone with Ringo and Casper. It was already late in the day at this point, like 8 p.m. It was dark out, so there wasn't much left to do that night. Casper was already fed, and Jeremy already left enough food in Ringo's cage for the night. The cage was in the living room, in the center of the house, right next to the TV. So I turned on the TV and plopped down on the couch. Casper was hiding somewhere in the house, out of sight. Ringo was just sitting in the cage watching me. After a couple of hours of watching TV and eating my little dinner, I went to bed, no reason to stay up super late. I slept with the bedroom door open, and I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound. The best way I could describe it was 2 loud cracking sounds. I sat up and listened for a second. Nothing, so I laid back down and went back to sleep. There was a giant bird in a cage downstairs. Hearing sounds was not unexpected. The next day was pretty easy. I cleaned up Casper's litter box, fed him, and fed Ringo. I let Ringo out to play for a couple of hours. He perched on the back of the couch behind me as I watched TV. Jeremy told me that Casper and Ringo typically ignore each other, so I wouldn't have to worry about one attacking the other. Fast forward a few hours, and I left the house to go explore the area a little bit. I went for a walk in the park and FaceTimed a couple of my friends. I did a little driving around too, and picked up some food for dinner that night before returning to the house. It was around 7 o'clock when I returned. I interacted with the pets for a couple of hours as I ate my dinner and watched TV. Jeremy was supposed to be returning home late tomorrow. I called it a night early again. I went to sleep with the door open again. However, once again, I woke up to a sound. This time, I believe it was the sound of the bedroom door closing. I looked up and saw that the bedroom door was now closed. While the windows were open, there was little to no wind to create a drift. This was weird. I also could hear sounds from downstairs. It sounded like Ringo moving about in his cage, talking. I got out of my bed to check on him and make sure he's okay. As I was walking down the stairs, I heard him talking more clearly. I got to the cage and saw he was wide awake and walking around. I remember what Jeremy told me to do to get him to quiet down, hand him a particular treat. I dug into the bag to grab one, but then he said the phrase, "Daddy's home." I found that odd and slightly unsettling. I put a treat in front of Ringo's face and he grabbed it. This ultimately did end up getting him to stop making noise, but it still felt weird that he'd wake up in the middle of the night. I went back to the bedroom and left the door open. I fell back asleep. And I shit you not, I woke up once again, maybe a little more than an hour later. This time, I didn't hear what woke me up, but I looked up in the room in a daze, and in the near pitch black darkness of the room, I saw a black mass in the center of the room, moving away from the bed and out the door. I sat up and almost screamed until I fully came to. I now had to wonder if what I just saw was a hallucination or not. I grabbed my phone to turn on the flashlight, but on the screen, I saw I had gotten a text from Jeremy around an hour ago. It was him telling me that if Ringo makes noises in the middle of the night, it's normal and to ignore it. I stared at my screen, rereading the text at least 10 times. That text was sent conveniently around the same time I got up to give Ringo a treat. I felt ill all of a sudden. That black mass in the room I just saw, what if that were real? What if it wasn't a hallucination? I got out of bed and turned on the lamp. I started packing my bag as quickly as possible. I didn't bring many clothes, so I was packed very quickly. I quietly went to the bathroom next to grab all my toiletries quick, and then I tiptoed back out of the bathroom and I was in the near pitch-black upstairs hallway with all the bedroom doors. I looked down the hallway, and I could swear I heard the faintest sound coming from one of the bedrooms. I don't know why, but this overwhelming curiosity almost hypnotized me, and I crept down the hall to what I presumed to have been the master bedroom. I put my ear up close to the door, and I heard a rattling sound. It sounded like a bed rocking. He was in there. Finally, he drifted out of the door. That fucking creep. I knocked on the door and said, "Jeremy, are you in there?" The rocking sound stopped, and there was now dead silence. I repeated myself, and this time said, "If you're in the house, I need to know right now, before I leave." Still silence. I left the house in a hurry, leaving the key on the table, and I didn't look back. On my drive home, I sent him a long voice text saying I'm considering reporting this to the authorities as some sort of stalker or breach of privacy situation, and that I was extremely disturbed that he was in the house. He immediately tried calling me 3 times, but I was honestly too scared to pick up. He then sent me a text apologizing and stating that his brother unexpectedly came home that night. I knew it was complete horseshit. I demanded he just pay me, and I won't pursue this any further. He sent me a payment via Zelle, and that was that. I hate to even mention this part, but the next day I realized I was missing a certain article of clothing from my bag that I know for a fact was grabbed out of my bag by him. I have largely chosen to block this memory out. This will be the first and last time I ever write a detailed recounting of this experience. There was this one weekend that my aunt, uncle, and cousins went away upstate, and instead of taking their dog with them or to a kennel, they asked me to watch her for the weekend at their house. I was excited to do so because not only would they pay me, but they are loaded and their house is full of fun stuff to do. They have a Havanese, which is a tiny dog. Her name is Luna. I didn't mind watching Luna because she was such a calm, low mental dog. I just fed her twice a day and let her out back a couple times a day. She always followed me whatever room I was in. So if I was in the giant living room watching TV, she'd be laying on the floor in the center of the room. If I went downstairs to the basement to play video games, she followed and would lay down there. While playing video games in the basement, Luna suddenly lifted her head from the ground and stared in the direction of the boiler room. I had a dog before, and I knew this was something dogs did to any slight sound, but it was still enough of a reason for me to pause the game and feel a little unsettled. I looked in the direction of the boiler room as well. It was silent and dark in there, and there was no chance of me going in there, so I unpaused the game and continued playing, albeit a bit uncomfortable now. I guess my childish fears were getting the better of me. She put her head back down for a minute, but then again, lifted it up and looked towards the boiler room. Deep down, I knew it was probably nothing, but I was still a bit too freaked out to continue playing video games comfortably, so I turned everything off and ran up the stairs, shutting the door once Luna came hopping up. They also had another big gaming room on the main floor. It was kind of disconnected from the rest of the house in that you had to go through a narrow hallway to get there. Luna plopped herself down in front of my feet in this little game room. I played more video games for a while until it got late. Then I went down the hall to the room I'd be sleeping in, a guest bedroom that was nicer than my bedroom back at home. I threw on a pair of sweatpants and a white undershirt as pajamas and jumped under the covers, not going to sleep without watching a little TV first. Luna was obviously by the bedside. She was really growing on me, how affectionate yet calm she was. I eventually turned off the TV and went to sleep. My sleep was disturbed by a growling sound. I turned on the bedside lamp and saw Luna laying still on the floor, head down, yet growling at something. I said her name a few times, but she didn't look at me. Then she lifted her head finally to look at the closet door. Her growling grew more intense, and she stood up now, still looking at the closet. She didn't bark though. In fact, I never heard her bark once. I looked at the closet, a sliding wooden door closet. It was open about 3 inches from the left side. Of course, I couldn't really see anything from the inside. I got up from the bed really sneaky-like and tiptoed closer to the closet. I don't know what I was planning on doing really. I guess I just wanted to look through the crack or see if I could hear something. So at that point I said, when I got about 5 feet away from the closet door, something that I couldn't see from my bed came into view through the crack of the door, and I couldn't see any face or anything, it was too dark. But I knew what I was looking at in that closet was a person's eye, perfectly tucked between the wall and the edge of the door, looking into the room, or now at me. XHF, I screamed, but it didn't do much good since I was alone. I took Luna and ran for the front door, grabbing the emergency cell phone on the counter to call 911 during my run away from the house. It was 1 in the morning, so I didn't bother calling my aunt and uncle. The cops did a thorough sweep and found someone in the pantry closet downstairs. I never saw him though, because another officer was preoccupying me with conversation to calm me down. I was just relieved to go back inside, knowing I was the only one in the house, besides Luna of course, who just might have saved my life that night. A cold December in the Vermont countryside. Home alone for the night. Watching my friend's dog Chester doing him a favor, even though it was unbearably cold outside. I couldn't let his dog out in the yard, we don't have fences up here, so he could easily run into the woods and get lost. That meant, unfortunately, I had to take him for a walk in the cold. My friend gave me an old dirty blue tearing leash to use. Chester seemed excited when I hooked up the leash ring onto his collar ring, and he instantly pulled me towards the front door. I could already tell he'd be a pain in the ass to walk. Stepping out into the cold was a major shock to my body. I just wanted to get through this walk as soon as possible. I ran a little bit with Chester just to warm myself up. He stopped us to sniff one of the countless trees on the side of the dirt road. I thought for sure he'd do his business, but then he perked up and stared off into the woods. Then his deep, loud bark started echoing through the woods as he tugged and tried to pull me into the woods. I tried my hardest to hold him back, but the leash snapped at a weak point and off Chester went into the woods, disappearing in seconds. His barking faded away into the woods until I couldn't hear it anymore. I chased after him, screaming his name. He probably ran off chasing a deer or a small animal or something, but with only the light of my phone, I knew I wouldn't be able to find him. He would have to come back to me on his own. After a while, I stood in place and continuously called Chester's name. I heard footsteps nearby and got excited that Chester must have been coming back, but as the footsteps got louder, I realized they were much too loud, slow, and heavy to be a dog's footprints. They sounded more like a pair of feet making the noise, not 4 legs. I turned out my light, now convinced I was hearing the footsteps of a person. The footsteps seemed to be circling me. My fear was if it was intentional or not, and if I'd been seen or not. I tried my best to tiptoe back to the road. I was covering decent distance. And then the sound of the footsteps just stopped or faded away. I don't remember noticing which one, but because of this I was more laxed with my footsteps and walked a little faster. Little did I realize that the black object I was walking towards was a person's back. I stopped, as it felt like my heart did too. I was covering my mouth, trying not to make a sound, but it was obviously too late. The person definitely heard my footsteps. At this point, I took a chance and asked if they had by some chance seen my dog. But they didn't even turn around. They had their hood on, so I couldn't even gauge what they looked like. I took another chance and put my hand on their shoulder, and once again felt like my heart stopped. The shoulder felt hard and wooden. I walked in front of the body facing the tree and saw nothing inside of the hood, nothing but a long stick holding it up. It was some kind of fake dummy. That meant whatever was making those footsteps was still nearby. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I just ran back to the road and then up the hill and back to the house. I never went back for Chester, and he never came back to the house. Telling my friend was the worst part. He hated me afterwards, and I expected he would, given that we weren't exactly the closest friends to begin with already. That night, though, I had a nightmare that I was in my room and I heard Chester's barks out in the woods, like scared, whimpering barks. I woke up and looked out the window to the dark woods, hoping the barks were real, and I just heard them in my dream, but they weren't. It was silent. I don't know what happened to Chester. I don't know what the dummy was doing in the woods, and I don't know who was making those footsteps that night. Quite frankly, I'm not sure I want to know the answer to any of it. I was watching my neighbor's dog for a little extra money one night. She was a creepy neighbor though, not intentionally, but she was kind of old and had an antisocial vibe to her. She was obsessed with her dog, so when she was apparently visiting family or something across the state and couldn't bring the dog, she practically begged me to watch her. But when I agreed for the right price, she literally scolded me about what to do and not to do as far as taking care of her. The dog's name was Hazel. There was a lot of pressure put on me for watching this dog. She insisted I stay at her place instead of taking the dog next door to our place. She had a spare bedroom with a single twin-sized bed and a desk in the corner. That was all that was in the room. The dog was small, white, and puffy. I don't exactly know what kind, maybe a Bichon Frise. It was loud, yappy, and annoying though, and I hated it. I started watching it around 5 and just played on my phone for hours, only feeding the dog once that night. Thankfully, I'd only be doing this for one night. I brought over my Xbox to play games on her TV, but then I realized the TV was so archaic it didn't even have an HDMI port, so I couldn't even hook it up. So I spent most of the day playing games on my phone and listening to Hazel's yapping at every little thing. I did do a little snooping around, of course. I looked into the woman's bedroom since the door was left open, even though she told me not to go in there. The furniture was all archaic in there as well, and there was a big rectangular rug in the middle of the room with Indian-looking patterns. When night came, I went to bed as early as possible, like 9 o'clock. The only light came from the portables the police used to cordon off the prison cell. I'm sure Hazel was sleeping in the woman's room. I didn't really care. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of Hazel's constant barking. I screamed, "Shut up!" but the barking seemed kind of muffled in sound, like it was coming from a basement or something. But I wasn't aware of a basement in the house. I walked to where I heard the barking coming from. I was confused to realize it was coming from the woman's bedroom. I walked inside and saw the rug in the middle of the room had been rolled up to the corner, exposing a door in the grounds, opened up. It was pitch black down there, but Hazel's barking was definitely coming from down there. I was scared shitless. Obviously, Hazel didn't open this door, and she was barking at something down there. I didn't want to shine a light down there in fear of what I was going to see. I was about to leave the house and run home, but I couldn't just leave Hazel down there. I whispered her name, and then the barking stopped. I was hoping to see her running up the stairs from the dark abyss any moment, but she didn't. Something did come out of the darkness, though. It was a hand, grabbing onto the side of the opening, the hand of a man. I was faced with a fight or flight scenario, and being the little 15-year-old I was, I chose to run for it. I woke my parents and screamed at them what just happened. My dad called the police and reported a break-in next door. The police checked the woman's bedroom as I described. The rug was apparently back in place and the door was shut. They still went to check it out, apparently found a big crawl space type area with a bunch of weird things laying around. No sign of a person or Hazel. When the neighbor returned home the next day, my dad confronted her for me. Apparently, she threw a huge tantrum and mentioned something about the demons making noises below her at night. Then she exploded into tears over her dog. Ever since that day, we haven't spoken a single word to her. We hardly ever see her anyway. She never leaves her house. I'm okay with that. It still terrifies me to think of that night, though.